Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, Chrystia Freeland is refusing to go quietly into the night, resigning from her position as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister this morning, just hours before she was scheduled to deliver a fall economic statement. But on Friday, the Prime Minister told her she would be shuffled out of finance, and rather than just tendering her resignation to the Prime Minister, she chose to share it on social media, saying in part the following: "To be effective, a minister must speak on behalf of the Prime Minister and with his full confidence. In making your decision, you made it clear that I no longer credibly enjoy that confidence and possess the authority that comes with it. For the past number of weeks, you and I have found ourselves at odds about the best path forward for Canada. Our country today faces a grave challenge," she writes. "The incoming administration in the United States is pursuing a policy of economic nationalism, including a threat of 25% tariffs. We need to take that threat extremely seriously. That means keeping our fiscal powder dry today so we have the reserves we may need for a coming tariff war. That means issuing costly political gimmicks which we can ill afford and which makes Canadians doubt that we recognize the gravity of the moment. I know Canadians would recognize and respect such an approach. They know when we are working for them, and they equally know when we are focused on ourselves. Inevitably, our time in government will come to an end. But how we deal with the threat our country currently faces will define us for a generation and perhaps longer." Again, major parts of the resignation letter that was published by Chrystia Freeland on social media today handed over to the Prime Minister. Now, she also goes on to say that she will continue to sit as a Liberal MP and she intends to run again in her Toronto riding whenever that election happens. But as you saw, a few admissions in that letter that the Prime Minister was going to shuffle her out of the finance portfolio. We heard that was a strong possibility, that she and the Prime Minister disagreed about how deep the government's deficit spending could go, even insulting the Prime Minister by calling programs like the GST holiday and the $250 checks costly political gimmicks. All of this happening as Sean Fraser was holding a news conference early this morning explaining his resignation from the Trudeau cabinet as well. Well, eventually, as he will still sit in cabinet until the next election. Let's bring in Julie Van Dusen right now, frequent contributor to CPAC, as we cover today, which has really been this roller coaster of a day, Julie, up and down, up and down. A major question once we saw Chrystia Freeland resign was who was actually going to be the next finance minister. It took several hours. By the late afternoon, we saw Dominic LeBlanc being sworn in at Rideau Hall. He will sit as the next finance minister. This will be his third portfolio on top of intergovernmental affairs and public safety. You know, that was just part of it because while he was being sworn in, we also have to note that her resignation touched off more Liberal division. As we take a look right now at an unexpected Liberal caucus meeting that happened late this afternoon. This was at the Sir John A. Macdonald building, part of the parliamentary precinct just across the street from Parliament Hill. And you know, the last caucus meeting was supposed to be last week, but now this emergency one is held because of what has happened today. Let's talk about this beginning with Dominic LeBlanc, because it's been such a chaotic day. And here you have the ultimate fixer for the Prime Minister. But can Dominic LeBlanc actually fix this for Justin Trudeau in calming the waters of what seems to be a very turbulent time for the Liberal government?
Well, he's not a magician. He can't turn around very bad by-election results that have happened in the past. There's another by-election tonight, and in Langley, Cloverdale, BC. And I mean, we'll see what happens, but no one expects the Liberals to win that. I mean, he's a long trusted friend. I mean, they come from similar backgrounds, Trudeau's father being Prime Minister, Dominic LeBlanc's father being the Governor General, and of course the old story goes that he was babysitting Trudeau and so on. Trusted, goes back a long way, took him to Mar-a-Lago 10 days ago to deal with Donald Trump, but he's not, like I say, he's not a magician. He can't turn around a year of bad polls. And this caucus dissent is not new. I mean, we've been covering it for weeks. It just took a little break in the whole Mar-a-Lago Trump tariff sidebar. But I mean, it's there simmering. It's blown up. This is an earthquake.
Well, earthquake, so much so that, you know, I saw a number of Liberal MPs speaking to the media where they've been largely silent up until this moment in time. But, you know, where does that leave then the caucus, the party and the Prime Minister? All this chaos, again, as you say, this has been going beneath the surface for several weeks now, if not months, and now we have this major resignation, the Prime Minister's right-hand woman, if you will. and the Deputy Prime Minister. Where does this leave Justin Trudeau and the party?
Well, I'm surprised he's been able to hang on so long. Usually when the knives are turned on you and people are beaking off, and you can imagine what they're saying in the ridings and so on, the writing is on the wall, and it has been for a long time. And the bottom line is what we're seeing, and I've seen it in the past, is quite unusual, but if he won't leave, because he's dug in, they're going to leave him. And we're seeing it over and over again. We saw it with Sean Fraser today. Of course, everyone's got different reasons and so on. But Sean Fraser, of course, has children, and he wants to spend time with his children, and he's been around since 2015. But he's not stupid. He is a rising star. People talk about how articulate he is, and he looks at the next 8 years and says, do I want to do that? I've seen this movie. Back in 2000, when Stockwell Day was the leader of the Canadian Alliance, he screwed up royally, but there were lawsuits against him. People kept saying, he's got to go, he's got to go. He wouldn't go. So an MP told me one day, watch, we're going to leave him. What do you mean you're going to leave him? Well, bit by bit, they all stood up over the weeks and moved to another part of the House of Commons. They left him. And that is what you're seeing now. I don't know who's going to be standing around him in the near future, but it's not looking very good in terms of him, being able to keep this job and have any credibility.
Yeah, well, from Wayne Long, the Liberal MP for New Brunswick, about a third of the caucus is not with Trudeau, and we now have Minister number 8 in Sean Fraser saying that he will not run again, and then Minister number 9 soon after, Chrystia Freeland, tendering her resignation. A lot to be watching here. Julie, thank you for starting off our coverage today.
You're welcome.
Well, let's turn now to some of the political reaction now, because not surprisingly, the Conservative leader was quick to jump on the Liberal chaos. Take a listen to what we heard from Pierre Poilievre earlier today.
Justin Trudeau has lost control, and yet he clings to power. We cannot accept this kind of chaos, division, weakness, while we're staring down the barrel of a 25% tariff from our biggest trading partner and closest ally, which, by the way, is headed by a newly elected president with a strong and fresh mandate, a man who can spot weakness from a mile away.
Well, joining us now is Lisa Raitt, former minister in the Stephen Harper government. She is currently vice chair of global investments at CIBC. Lisa, thank you for making the time.
It's my pleasure, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with the significance of this moment. How significant is it for a finance minister to resign just hours before tabling a fall economic statement?
Well, it's significant for a finance minister to resign in general. It always is a commentary on the government, but to do so hours before she's meant to rise and present a government finance document is extraordinary. And I would say that to do so before she has to announce it, and then sending out a letter to the Prime Minister indicating that she felt that he was thinking about his own personal political stance as opposed to thinking about the benefit of the country is catastrophic.
Catastrophic. Is that the one part of the letter that really stood out for you? Because I have to say, when it was put on social media this morning, I was looking at it and I couldn't believe just how frank and really how unleashed she was in that letter.
Yeah, but I would say that she was very controlled in the letter. It wasn't emotive. It wasn't emotional. She was stating the facts as she saw it. She wasn't complaining about the fact that he was demoting her. What she said was, we have come at a crossroads, and the crossroads have led me to be concerned that you're spending too much money, boss, and that we're going to need it in order to be able to deal with what's happening to the south of the border. I disagree with you, and as a result, I'm going to leave cabinet.
Yeah, you say south of the border, and she did note the fact that this is a very important moment for Canada. She says the country faces a grave challenge right now with Donald Trump, his threat of a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods. Can Justin Trudeau rally the Team Canada spirit if he, as he says he wants, if he himself is losing control of his own cabinet?
Not only the cabinet part, but I mean, even more damning is the commentary in there about the minister observing that the prime minister may have been picking fights with premiers, and that doesn't actually help when it comes to having a Team Canada approach. The timing of the premier's meeting in Toronto today, saying pretty much the same thing, that they want Team Canada and that they don't want to have this political infighting. It all paints a big picture of a prime minister focused on himself only, not on the fortunes of the country, and making decisions that aren't for the benefit of Canadians. And that in and of itself is very damning.
Yeah, damning. I'm wondering about the potential damage of it beyond Canada, though, because, of course, when you talk about a fall economic statement, it's not just Canadians that are watching it. You have rating agencies internationally watching it, investors watching it. How would they react to the political drama that's preceded today's economic statement?
I don't know if they're going to be taken in by the drama because, as you probably are aware, the United Kingdom, Australia, the United States, there's always drama around politics. But what does get their attention is the lack of being able to hit metrics that the government has indicated that they're holding themselves to account. So, for example, Chrystia Freeland said that she was going to have a $40 billion deficit and she wouldn't go beyond that. But the reality is that how big the deficit may not have as much an impact as the fact that Chrystia Freeland promised one thing and couldn't deliver on it. That makes the rating agencies and other economists think, well, where does it all end? And what is the plan for Canada in the long term? And what kind of trust do we have in order to give assurances to people who are investing that this is a good bet?
Mm-hmm. Now, we just heard from Mr. Poilievre earlier. He basically said that, Trudeau's losing control of his own government. He wants an election sooner rather than later. Do you think he'll get one?
He could. I mean, from a purely procedural basis, those supplementary estimates, which I know is inside baseball, but I know that the folks who watch this show think about these kinds of things. But the supplementary estimates, although they have passed the House of Commons, still have to go through the Senate. If any amendments are made in the Senate, they have to come back to the House for approval again. And what's left in the House for them to take a look at these? Could the government fall on a Senate sending back supplementary estimates? That is a possibility. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a confidence motion sometime in April for the government to be in a precarious situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you've been in politics. You've been watching politics a long time. Do you think there's any way forward for Justin Trudeau other than a resignation?
Yeah, an election. I'm team election on this, Michael. I think that he has let it go too far. His time to resign probably was in the summer when the rest of his team wanted him to, meaning a lot of the MPs. He chose not to. He wants to carry them into the next election. I say he should get his wish, that he should take them into the next election, and that he should call an election as soon as he possibly can and let the Canadians have a vote on whether or not they want him to be truly at the helm of negotiating with the United States after Donald Trump gets sworn in on January 20th.
Mm-hmm. You raise a good point about negotiating with Donald Trump and how much faith Canadians can have in it. What do you think this whole matter has done to the type of confidence Canadians can have in the status quo politically vis-a-vis Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think Mr. Trudeau is strategically adept. Let me just put it this way. The clown show, for lack of a better word, that has come out on the last 48 hours is stunning. The Prime Minister took the Finance Minister aside on Friday morning and said to her, you're going to get shuffled out of your position. This is what I'm going to offer you. By the way, though, I still want you to stand up on Monday and deliver a fall economic update that you don't agree with, filled with things that I told you to put in there. And then 2 days later, we're going to fire you and bring in somebody else who's probably going to say that your fall economic update was a mistake. And in what world of human resources does anybody think that that's actually going to pass muster? He obviously figured out that, or he figured that Chrystia Freeland was going to take it on the chin and go ahead and support him once again. And this time she didn't. So he doesn't have, I think, the capacity or the understanding of strategy writ large in order to not understand what an opposing force is going to do if you make a certain action. It's fundamentals of negotiations. He is blind to what other people may or may not do.
Lisa, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thanks, Michael.
That's Lisa Raitt. Now, Lisa Raitt did mention the fall economic statement. It was supposed to be tabled with a speech in the House today by Chrystia Freeland. Of course, that did not happen. Instead, the statement was tabled with little fanfare, although the numbers are certainly worth noting. Take a look at the federal deficit first and foremost. Now, back in April, the federal government estimated the deficit for fiscal 23-24 would be $40.1 billion. Instead, it came in at $61.9 billion, a full $21.8 billion higher, or more than 50% higher. Still, thanks to economic growth, it seems, the federal government was able to stick to its other fiscal guardrail, with the debt-to-GDP ratio holding at 42.1%, which Chrystia Freeland said it would last week when she was asked. Well, in a moment, we'll be joined by Catherine Lafrance, but first, take a listen to what we heard from the Bloc Québécois leader today and what he had to say about the Prime Minister's future.
J'ai envie de vous dire de façon très, très simple, c'est fini pour le gouvernement de Justin Trudeau. C'est terminé. Il faut qu'il prenne acte de la réalité que son gouvernement, qui était déjà passablement dysfonctionnel, vient d'être désavoué par la ministre des Finances qui refuse de lire la mise à jour économique, donc un petit budget, qui était la vice-première ministre également, qui était l'allié de longue date de Justin Trudeau, vient de le désavouer.
Alors, nous recevons nos observatrices de l'actualité cette semaine, Catherine Lévesque, correspondante parlementaire au National Post, et Geneviève Tellier, politologue à l'Université d'Ottawa. Bonsoir, mesdames.
Bonsoir.
Alors, la première question qu'on se pose aujourd'hui, c'est pourquoi les choses se sont passées de cette façon-là. Alors, Justin Trudeau, qui a dit à Chrystia Freeland vendredi qu'elle n'aurait plus le ministère des Finances, alors qu'elle devait prononcer l'énoncé économique lundi. Est-ce que tout ça ne ressemble pas à un monumental gâchis, finalement?
Je dirais oui.
Oui, hein?
Et c'est causé par le premier ministre. Bon, c'était risqué d'avoir cette discussion-là. En plus de toute l'humiliation que Mme Freeland a subie à travers ces derniers jours, mais aussi ces derniers mois. On se souvient de ces rumeurs pendant l'été, comme quoi il n'avait plus confiance en sa ministre des Finances, et dans les derniers jours, à quel point il voulait avoir Mark Carney à sa place. Donc, je pense que c'était la goutte de trop, et de toute évidence, elle a choisi, le pire moment pour le premier ministre Trudeau pour démissionner. C'était juste avant la mise à jour économique. Exactement, je pense que c'était voulu.
Geneviève, est-ce que c'est étonnant parce qu'on n'avait pas l'impression qu'ils ont toujours été à couteau tiré? Alors, ça surprend aussi ça,
Ça
quand
surprend
même.
énormément. Madame Freeland, c'est la plus proche alliée de Justin Trudeau. C'est l'impression qu'on avait. Quand ça allait, les pires journées de Justin Trudeau, Madame Freeland était là pour dire non, faites-lui confiance, il y a un plan, on sait où on s'en va. Elle était toujours là, la voix rassurante, et on y croyait. Maintenant, je pense qu'on est en train de se poser la question, est-ce que c'était vraiment le cas? Parce que des fois, il faut être solidaire, mais on y croit plus ou moins. Mais on n'avait jamais entendu de tension. Oui, il y avait eu des critiques, mais pas entre les personnes, pas entre Mme Freeland puis M. Trudeau. Elle était vraiment son allié. On entendait parler qu'elle voulait peut-être lui succéder, mais lui succéder, pas le tasser comme ça a été fait ou ça pourrait se faire maintenant. Alors, c'est vraiment surprenant.
Alors, que veut-elle? Que peut-elle obtenir maintenant et que veut-elle? Quel est l'avenir de Chrystia Freeland, Geneviève?
Je pense la course au leadership a commencé ce matin. Alors, si vous regardez bien sa lettre, elle dit déjà qu'est-ce qui va mal puis qu'est-ce qu'elle ferait de mieux. C'est déjà une indication.
Un message clair.
Oui, elle n'est pas partie lécher ses plaies à Toronto dans son comté. Elle est encore à Ottawa, elle participe aux réunions. Elle est visible. Alors, elle veut rester au Parti libéral. Elle a des ambitions. Si on n'était pas sûr, parce qu'à un moment donné, on se disait, est-ce qu'elle veut vraiment être première ministre? C'était pas clair, mais je pense que maintenant, on a vraiment la réponse. Et est-ce qu'elle veut même remplacer Trudeau pour finir le mandat? J'ouvre la porte, je soulève la question. Ce serait même quelque chose de possible, à mon avis.
Du même avis, Catherine?
Bien, écoutez, je pense que de toute évidence, elle voulait rétablir sa réputation, hein, dire comme quoi...
et se détacher.
Se détacher
du
de Justin Trudeau et de dire, bien, en fait, les dernières décisions, hein, finalement, je n'étais pas d'accord. Donc, elle met vraiment carte sur table. Et je suis d'accord, c'est peut-être une façon de lancer la course au leadership, mais je pense aussi que c'était une façon de... Elle a tellement été loyale ces derniers mois et ces dernières années. Et là, c'était la goutte de trop. Elle ne pouvait plus soutenir le premier ministre, lui qui voulait la reléguer à un poste de ministre, je dirais pas junior, mais paraît-il que c'était le poste de ministre responsable des relations canado-américaines. Donc, c'est pas vraiment un vrai ministère. Donc, de toute évidence,
c'est pas ce qu'elle voulait.
C'est pas ce qu'elle voulait. Et puis, je pense que vraiment, elle voulait mettre ça au clair. Et d'ailleurs, elle est là à l'heure où on se parle. Elle est dans le caucus, dans cette rencontre actuellement. Donc, j'ai l'impression que vraiment, ça doit être une rencontre très tendue.
Qui doit être très difficile. Alors, dans ce contexte-là, qu'est-ce qui peut se passer? Si vous étiez Justin Trudeau, qu'est-ce que vous feriez ce soir? Catherine, on va commencer par vous.
Bien, écoutez, je pense qu'on entend les dissidents, on les a entendus toute la journée, là, comme quoi ils ont réitéré leur appel à Justin Trudeau à ce qu'il démissionne. Je pense que vraiment, il doit considérer toutes ses options actuellement parce que, de toute évidence, même ses plus proches alliés, même Mme Freeland ne peut plus le soutenir. Ça défait aussi son image de premier ministre féministe, hein? Sa première ministre des Finances féminine qui le délaisse de cette façon. Donc, je pense que vraiment, il doit voir toutes ses options, décider s'il veut vraiment rester et vivre à travers ces moments difficiles jusqu'à la fin de son mandat, ou annoncer qu'il partira à un moment ou à un autre, ou déclencher une course à la direction tout de suite, pourquoi pas?
Geneviève, a-t-il encore des alliés? Est-ce qu'il doit démissionner, déclencher des élections?
Le départ est la chose la plus facile à faire. C'est-à-dire qu'il va dire, j'ai même pas à me casser la tête, est-ce que j'ai des alliés ou non, ou je pars. Et c'est facile à faire parce qu'il peut proroger la Chambre. Il y a le temps. Demain encore, la Chambre sèche. Et en prorogeant la Chambre, ça lui donne ça donne plusieurs semaines au Parti libéral. Et même s'il la proroge pas, la Chambre revient juste à la fin janvier. Donc, il y a le temps. S'il veut rester, c'est là que c'est compliqué. Alors là, il y a peut-être un peu moins de temps. L'échéancier est le même, mais là, il faut vraiment qui aille chercher ses appuis. Et j'ai l'impression que ce soir, à la réunion, il va y avoir de nouvelles dissidences. Il y a des gens qui, ouvertement, maintenant, vont dire, bien là, ça ne marche plus. Tu as déjà été avisé. Ça, c'est la gourde d'eau. C'était une erreur de ta part à propos de Chrystia Freeland. Un vendredi, la mise à jour économique, tout ça se met en place. Mike Carney, on ne sait pas qu'est-ce qui va arriver. Et là, c'est problématique. Donc, c'est vraiment à lui de voir qu'est-ce qu'il veut faire. Les deux choses sont possibles, mais les deux choses sont difficiles à faire. C'est évident.
D'autant plus qu'on le sait maintenant, parce que ça a été un autre des rebondissements de la journée, on a finalement obtenu les informations de la mise à jour économique. C'était incertain à un moment donné, pendant l'après-midi, on n'était pas sûr de les avoir aujourd'hui. Mais finalement, ça a été rendu public. Alors, on apprend que le déficit est beaucoup plus important que prévu. Ça ne va pas aider M. Trudeau, c'est sûr et certain. Est-ce que c'est ce qui va mettre fin, finalement, à ce gouvernement? Ce qui va l'achever?
On savait qu'il allait y avoir des déficits, mais je pense que vraiment, toutes ces idées de dépenses, de chèques de 250 $, je pense que vraiment, là, on ne peut plus envisager ces mesures-là pour aider les Canadiens parce que le déficit est beaucoup plus gros que prévu. Je pense qu'on ne s'attendait pas au gouvernement à ce que l'économie ralentisse autant. Donc là, il n'y a plus de place pour quoi que ce soit, pour donner des bonbons aux Canadiens avant une élection. C'est bien évident et je pense que Mme Freeland le savait très bien. Elle avait tenté d'avertir le premier ministre, mais là, on ne peut plus ajouter à ce déficit-là. Il est déjà beaucoup trop gros.
Geneviève, est-ce que le gouvernement, est-ce que M. Trudeau a mal géré l'argent des contribuables?
On n'a pas de marge de manœuvre, effectivement. Il y a depuis le début, depuis 2015, on a l'impression que c'est le sac à bonbons, puis qu'on peut piger dedans, puis que tout va bien. Il nous a toujours donné cette impression-là. Et quand son ministre des Finances lui dit non, ça ne fonctionne pas, il le renvoie. C'est le message qu'on a eu. Alors, c'est pas un premier ministre pour qui l'économie, c'est une préoccupation. Et là, on en voit les effets. Alors, peut-être pas 3 ans, on peut se permettre un peu de largesse, mais pendant 9 ans, on ne peut pas. Et c'est vrai, Catherine, ce qu'elle disait, je suis d'accord avec toi, il n'y a plus de marge de manœuvre. Alors, s'il arrive une catastrophe demain matin, on s'endette encore plus parce qu'il n'y a pas d'autre façon. On n'a pas pensé aux revenus. Et il va y avoir...
ce que Mme Freeland a dit dans sa lettre de démission. Et elle a frappé Justin Trudeau là où ça fait mal.
Oui. Oui. Et il va y avoir une catastrophe parce qu'il va y avoir Donald Trump. Alors, c'est une quasi-certitude qu'on va avoir besoin de plus d'argent. Et prenez juste les frontières. Alors, le fameux chiffre de 1,3 milliard $, ça a été annoncé dans la mise à jour. C'est échelonné sur 6 ans. C'est 81 millions cette année. C'est pas assez pour calmer le Donald Trump. Alors, il va falloir dépenser plus.
Oui. Alors, comment le gouvernement canadien va-t-il se présenter à Donald Trump en janvier prochain? Comment ça risque de se passer? Et comment est-ce possible de résister à quelqu'un comme Donald Trump? Parce que ça sera ça, finalement. On
est dans une position de faiblesse et je pense que M. Trump le sait et je pense qu'il va miser là-dessus. Je pense qu'il va savoir qu'on ne peut pas grand-chose contre lui. De toute évidence, je pense qu'on s'enligne vers une guerre de tarifs. Hein. On parle d'imprévus. Bien, ça, on peut le prévoir, là, cette guerre de tarifs. Mme Freeland le disait par ailleurs. On peut s'attendre peut-être à une récession aussi. Donc, vraiment, là, ce ne sont que des mauvaises nouvelles. Et malheureusement, le gouvernement y a contribué avec ce très grand déficit, mais aussi toute cette crise politique là, qui s'ensuit.
Une guerre de tarifs qui va être désastreuse pour le Canada quand même.
Oui, désastreuse parce que déjà les économistes, et c'est rare qu'on voit les économistes arriver avec des chiffres si rapidement, déjà ils disent oui, il va y avoir des effets économiques majeurs. On va être en récession s'il y a une guerre de tarifs. Alors, ça ne sera pas bon pour l'économie. Le seul bon côté, c'est qu'on a des premiers ministres provinciaux. Alors, c'est pas juste Justin Trudeau, c'est d'autres premiers ministres, mais ça prend un chef. Et là, on n'a plus de chef. Alors,
c'est un chef d'orchestre. Oui. Merci, madame. Bonsoir.
Merci.
What I will tell you is I'm very disappointed that Chrystia Freeland has left the cabinet. I have tremendous amount of respect for her, and I have a lot of confidence in her abilities. I think it's a huge loss for Canadians at this time, and I wish her the very best.
What do you mean?
Minister Freeland made a very difficult decision. I respect her for it. That's not an easy thing to do. But what I really keep focused on, folks, is 41 million people.
So, just some of the reaction touched off today by Chrystia Freeland's resignation. Let's bring in Andrew Thompson now. He's been on Parliament Hill all day following developments for us. Well, I shouldn't say all day. You actually began on Sussex, about to go into the lockup, but then the world blows up. You go to Parliament Hill. And I want to know about Chrystia Freeland's former cabinet colleagues. He's still a member of caucus, no longer a member of cabinet. What are they saying about today's events?
Right now, as this news was coming out, Michael, well, number one, we should say we were also listening into Sean Fraser, the housing minister, say that he wasn't going to be running in the next election. Then as well, in the 9 o'clock hour, we see this letter from Chrystia Freeland. Ministers are on their way into cabinet, and throughout the day, ministers coming and going from that third floor corner of West Block where cabinet meets. A lot of questions, not so many answers throughout the day. Questions about their confidence in the Prime Minister's continued leadership, about whether they still have confidence to remain in cabinet. And there were also questions about the fall economic statement. There was a lot of confusion and uncertainty about whether that was going to be delivered or not, and who the actual finance minister is. We didn't learn that until later in the day. But here is a flavor, some of the back and forth between reporters and ministers.
Chrystia Freeland is a good friend, someone I work with very, very closely as president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Transport. This news has hit me really hard, and I'll reserve further comment until I have time to process it.
Not just I wish her all the best. Look, these are difficult and deeply personal decisions, and you know, obviously she's made that decision, and I respect her for it.
This government remains very strong, with a number of course, very capable ministers and the Prime Minister.
This is a serious situation, and we're going to act in the best interest of Canadians.
You have confidence in the Prime Minister?
What's the impact of that?
I have tremendous confidence in terms of the work we're doing as a government and the work that I continue to do as Minister of Justice.
What's your comment on Ms. Freeland's departure, please? Do you think
Is he resigning? We'll take the steps. Is Prime Minister Trudeau resigning?
You'll have to ask the Prime Minister.
That's a bit of a flavor of what ministers were and were not saying.
Okay, well, that's what the cabinet colleagues are saying, or former cabinet colleagues are saying. Let's talk a little bit about the NDP, though, because we heard from Pierre Poilievre and Yves-François Blanchet earlier in the program. But let's talk about the NDP, because obviously there's greater pressure now on Jagmeet Singh, and the big question of whether or not he's willing to bring this government down.
Right, and Jagmeet Singh was clear in his message, saying that the Prime Minister needs to resign, that Liberals are too busy fighting amongst themselves instead of fighting for Canadians. But as you know, you've been covering this quite a bit. The NDP's support for the government, even though that confidence and supply agreement is no longer happening, facing questions about how he's going to vote, whether to keep the government in power or not, what that means for confidence measures going forward. Here's his answer.
All options are on the table.
That's not an answer.
All options.
That's not an answer. What does this mean for your support with the Liberals, though? How can you say he needs to resign, but then you're not telling us what you're going to do for non-confidence?
I'm telling you that all options are on the table.
And so again, Michael, what that means in terms of how the NDP would approach a confidence vote, we don't know.
Okay, well, we are watching. Andrew Thompson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we're now joined by strategic communications consultant Peter Donalo. From 1993 to 1999, he was director of communications for the office of Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and he also led communications in 2 successful elections for the Liberal Party back in 1993 and 1997. Peter, good to see you again.
Hi, good to see you.
Listen, I rattle off those years, and as successful as they were for the Liberal Party, they were also marked by a lot of infighting between so-called Chrétien Liberals and Martin Liberals, but I don't recall things getting so bad as they are right now, that the finance minister resigns just hours before supposedly reading an economic statement. What does today's resignation tell you about how things have gotten within this government?
I mean, it's gobsmacking, right? I don't think anyone has ever seen anything like this before in Canada. Literally, the day she was supposed to deliver this key economic message, mini budget really, she not only quits, but on the way out, she essentially demolishes the government's economic or fiscal direction. I mean, it's really unprecedented. Very strange times, a very unusual thing to do, and it's a crisis that, unlike anything else that this government's gone through. In some ways, it's reminiscent of the Jody Wilson-Raybould thing and the Bill Morneau resignation, but the consequences now are just so much larger because of the state of the government, because of the situation with Donald Trump south of the border, and literally to do it the day of a economic update is unimaginable.
Mm-hmm. Well, add to that, she did it, it essentially came out at the same time that Sean Fraser was holding his news conference, announcing the fact that he would not be running again, essentially another senior cabinet minister stepping aside. There were 8 before him, then Chrystia Freeland. There's now rumors of more cabinet ministers thinking of leaving as well. Did she essentially, is this about loyalty to Chrystia Freeland, do you think, or did she unleash something within the cabinet that they were feeling frustration with the Prime Minister as well?
Well, Fraser has been going, Fraser's been on his way out for a while. It was no secret that he was going to be leaving. It's a very difficult seat for the Liberals to hold on to. It's been traditionally or often an NDP seat. So, I mean, and the government, as we know, is not very popular right now. So I think that's different. I think that's the same situation for a lot of the other ministers who've announced they wouldn't be running again or have moved on to other things. This is different. This is there was no one closer in that cabinet to the PM than Chrystia Freeland. And in many ways, she was in the weeds on a lot of files in which he wasn't. She ran a lot of stuff for him and for the government. She was inseparable from him in terms of policy. She defended him, when other people wouldn't. And this break is almost the only other break I can think of along these lines between this dramatic between a prime minister and a lieutenant is with Brian Mulroney and Lucien Bouchard in 1990 when Bouchard quit over Meech Lake or the failure of Meech Lake. And I just think this is along those lines. That was seen as a betrayal of a personal relationship that had gone back decades. Obviously, these two haven't been friends for as long, but who knows where this will lead to. I think this absolutely destabilizes the government. I think if there were a vote tomorrow in the House, and there won't be because the House is recessing, the government will probably fall. I think he's going to be facing a Liberal caucus today that is more than shaken. Liberal caucus has been shaken for more than a year now. I think we're beyond the being shaken part to the part where there's going to be open rebellion. So I have a hard time, to be honest, seeing how the Prime Minister actually survives this.
Okay, survives this? So you're talking about what, a resignation, a prorogation? How do you see this unfolding?
I mean, we'll see what happens. Stuff could happen very quickly this week. We'll see, you mentioned, Michael, the notion of other ministers stepping down. You remember when he was having the crisis over Jody Wilson-Raybould's resignation, that Jane Philpott's resignation on the heels of that really led to a moment of destabilization for that government. And I know people at the time inside the government felt that it was a risk that other ministers might go. And eventually that didn't happen and things were stabilized. This is different. Prime Minister is much less popular than he was now globally. In the big picture in Canada, he's the government's towards the end of its mandate. It's not he doesn't have a lot of levers here. And if he wanted to attract, the speculation is he was trying to bring in maybe Mark Carney or other people to the cabinet. This is not going to be helpful. I mean, they would look at this and want to steer clear of it entirely. Yeah. So will the PM at the end of the day, as you know, does hold cards. I mean, there's not a real mechanism for getting rid of him. On the other hand, if people start leaving the cabinet, or if caucus sends him a very strong message, then it's very, very difficult for him to hold on.
Yeah, what's been interesting about this day, Peter, is that we're hearing more and more MPs, rather than being quiet, they're actually giving interviews right now, talking about how disaffected they are and how they think it's time for the Prime Minister to leave. The Prime Minister aside, Justin Trudeau came in here promising to end internal party divisions for Liberals. Instead, he's now faced with a disaffected caucus, cabinet resignations, more in the offing if the reports are correct. So what lies ahead, not so much for Justin Trudeau, but for the party, do you think?
It's very difficult. We're also in an environment now, in a polarized political environment, in which the center is not holding in a lot of jurisdictions, even in Canada. Where there's not a lot of room for, Liberal Party. They won an election in New Brunswick recently, but in other jurisdictions they've fallen to second, third, even fourth place. In Ontario, they don't have 2 elections in a row. They don't have official party status. So this is the overall climate we're in. And if in a polarized environment, things can be very bad. Listen, I believe it actually helps the Liberals very much that Jagmeet Singh is a leader of the NDP, because I don't think he has traction with most Canadians. I think in a lot of ways he's dismissed as easily as Justin Trudeau is by a lot of Canadian voters. A change in leadership could change things, but we know through practical history that it often doesn't turn things around. It usually doesn't. I can only think of 2 situations in my experience where a change in leadership of an unpopular government has succeeded in terms of winning a subsequent majority governments, and those would be in Ontario with Kathleen Wynne in 2014, and then prior to that, actually in BC when Christy Clark took over the government of Gordon Campbell and was able to turn that around. Interestingly, 2 women leaders who went on to win majority governments. But that's, usually it doesn't work out that way. We all remember what happened with Kim Campbell in 1993 and other leaders who have taken over the leadership of unpopular governments. It usually doesn't end well.
Peter Dinallo, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's bring back Catherine de France now. She takes another look at the impact of what has happened today. Catherine.
Merci, Michael. Alors, analysons les nouvelles du jour, tout ce développement aujourd'hui, leur impact avec notre panel politique. Nous recevons Gilles Duceppe, Martin Cochon et Don Boudria. Alors, bonsoir, messieurs.
Bonsoir.
La vice-première ministre et ministre des Finances claque la porte alors qu'elle devait présenter sa mise à jour économique. On sait maintenant, parce qu'on a eu droit à ces informations-là, au contenu de la mise à jour, que le déficit est beaucoup plus élevé que prévu. Alors, il semble clair, ou en tout cas on peut en déduire, que Mme Freeland ne voulait pas cautionner tout ça. Est-ce que c'est la lecture que vous en faites aussi? Commençons avec vous, si vous voulez bien, Martin Cochon-Tiens.
Écoutez, je pense que lorsqu'on regarde la situation, Mme Freeland n'avait pas d'autres options. C'est-à-dire que lorsque vous êtes ministre des Finances, vous êtes évidemment un élément fondamental du gouvernement. Et c'est la même chose pour tout ministre en passant. Lorsque vous avez un désaccord avec le premier ministre, et que ce désaccord-là ne peut pas se résoudre d'une façon ou d'une autre, la seule façon de vous en sortir de façon honorable, c'est vraiment de remettre cette démission. Et c'est ce que Mme Freeland a fait. Et souhaitant, c'est évidemment une journée extrêmement difficile pour le gouvernement, mais ce n'est pas quelque chose d'exceptionnel en ce sens qu'on a déjà vécu ça dans le passé. C'est-à-dire, rappelez-vous à l'époque où Paul Martin avait démissionné du cabinet de M. Chrétien, et mon ancien collègue Don Boudria, qui est ici ce soir, s'en rappelle bien aussi. Donc, je pense qu'elle a fait la chose qu'il fallait faire, la chose honorable. Et maintenant, le gouvernement continue, la roue continue à tourner. Déjà aujourd'hui, on a quelqu'un, Dominique Leblanc, qui, à mon point de vue, est un excellent choix pour prendre la relève.
On y reviendra, si vous voulez bien, M. Cochon. M. Boudria, est-ce que vous êtes de cet avis-là aussi que Mme Freeland a fait finalement ce qu'elle devait faire?
Peut-être, mais je m'interroge toujours à savoir pourquoi l'a-t-elle fait la même journée qu'elle avait déjà préparé son énoncé économique. L'énoncé économique qu'on vient d'avoir il y a quelques minutes dans les bulletins d'information, évidemment, il avait été préparé par elle et son bureau. Donc, elle était pleinement au courant du contenu. Si elle était au courant du contenu et qu'elle était en désaccord avec le contenu, bien là, je me gratte la tête un peu. Je ne peux pas m'arracher les cheveux, je n'ai plus. Mais tout ça pour dire qu'elle aurait dû, à mon avis, prendre cette décision-là avant aujourd'hui. Et cet aspect-là, je le comprends un peu mal. Moi. Pourquoi aujourd'hui, le jour même de son énoncé économique, l'énoncé déjà imprimé, déjà tout fait, les briefings, sessions d'information devaient commencer quelques heures après qu'elle a rendu public sa lettre de démission.
Oui. Monsieur Duceppe, quelle est votre vision sur ce geste-là?
Moi, j'ai jamais vu quelque chose d'aussi rocambolesque en Chambre que ce qui s'est passé aujourd'hui. Là, dites-vous bien qu'on a un premier ministre qui annonce à sa ministre des Finances qu'elle ne sera plus ministre des Finances vendredi et qui lui demande de faire l'énoncé économique le lundi. Cette même ministre ne dit pas un mot, mais le lundi, elle démissionne avec une lettre où elle critique sévèrement le premier ministre, dénonce la suspension de la TPS et du 250 $, alors pourtant qu'elle l'a défendu pendant 2-3 semaines en Chambre. L'exposé économique, on refuse de le débattre en Chambre, mais il est débattu dans les médias. J'ai jamais vu, moi, la Chambre des communes fonctionner comme ça. C'est l'incohérence totale. On se circule au bye-bye 24, là, puis je pense que ça aurait été moins exagéré que ce qui s'est passé aujourd'hui.
Alors, je vais rester avec vous, Martin Cochon.
Un point, là. Si vous permettez, s'agissant de l'énoncé économique qui ne sera pas débattu en Chambre, une minute, là. Premièrement, au début, l'énoncé économique par Paul Martin était fait en comité parlementaire et pas en Chambre. Quand est arrivé Stephen Harper au pouvoir, l'énoncé économique a été fait devant le Empire Club of Toronto. Alors, c'est pas mal loin de la Chambre des communes à Ottawa. Ça a été fait ailleurs.
Si vous voulez bien, M. Boudria, si vous voulez bien...
Je suis entièrement d'accord avec ce que M. Boudria vient de dire. Cependant, on a déposé le document en Chambre et là, les députés ont dit on va en débattre.
Oui.
Si ça avait été fait à l'Empire Club, c'est bien sûr que les députés n'auraient pas rendu à l'Empire Club, mais là, on le dépose en Chambre. Et pourquoi refuser d'en débattre alors que c'est débattu des médias? C'est complètement aberrant, ça. On ne le dépose pas à ce moment-là. On tient une conférence de presse à l'extérieur de la Chambre. Je pense que M. Leblanc a dû apprendre en cours de journée que de devenir ministre des Finances, là. C'est de l'incohérence totale. Je n'ai jamais vu un premier ministre aussi incohérent que ça.
Alors, vraiment, la question qui s'impose maintenant, c'est est-ce que le premier ministre peut survivre à tout ça, à une ministre des Finances qui claque la porte de cette façon-là et à tout ce qui s'est passé depuis au cours de la journée? Gilles, je vais rester avec vous.
Bon, je ne sais trop. La question, c'est moins est-ce qu'il peut survivre que s'il y a quelqu'un qui veut le remplacer. Il y a de fortes chances qu'on a affaire le poste de ministre à Mark Carney, même s'il n'est pas député. Il est arrivé que des gens qui ne sont pas députés soient ministres pour une certaine période de temps. Mais je ne pense pas que Carney est intéressé d'aller à l'abattoir. Et je ne vois pas qui est intéressé actuellement à diriger les libéraux dans la prochaine élection parce que ça va très mal. Je ne sais pas ce qui va se passer. Il y a un certain nombre, il y a 8 ministres déjà qui ne se représentent pas, là. Disons que ça va très, très mal pour les libéraux.
Monsieur Cochon, vous devez bien admettre, même si vous avez un petit peu minimisé au début le geste de Mme Freeland, vous devez bien admettre que, comme le dit Gilles Duceppe, ça va mal quand même pour les libéraux, là.
Écoutez, c'est certain que ce n'est pas une période qui est facile. D'abord, concernant M. Trudeau, est-ce qu'il doit démissionner ou pas? Premièrement, et je pense que tout le monde autour de la table s'entend pour dire que la décision, ultimement, peu importe le grenouillage qu'on peut avoir dans le background, ultimement, appartient au premier ministre. Deuxièmement, pour l'ensemble du pays, est-ce que ce serait bienvenu que M. Trudeau, aujourd'hui ou dans les jours à venir, démissionne? Je ne pense pas. Je pense que ce qui est important aujourd'hui, c'est d'avoir déposé l'énoncé économique, de connaître la situation économique du Canada. Je disais tout à l'heure que mon ami Dominique Leblanc était un excellent choix. Pourquoi? Parce que Dominique était responsable jusqu'à présent de la question des douanes. Je pense qu'il a toujours conservé le dossier. Donc, il connaît bien le côté douanier. Et en même temps, il aura le côté des chiffres, ce qui va nous permettre de faire face ensemble, avec l'ensemble des provinces, aux différentes demandes de Donald Trump pour éventuellement éviter les tarifs. Et l'autre élément aussi, lorsqu'on parle de la question des tarifs, lorsqu'on parle de la question des douanes, il faut aussi se tenir debout par rapport aux États-Unis. Ce que je veux dire, c'est que le Canada a été le premier pays à réformer ses douanes au début des années 2000, et c'est moi qui étais à l'époque le ministre des Douanes, et c'est nous qui sommes allés de l'avant avec ce qu'on appelait la frontière intelligente, où on visait à utiliser plus des techniques pour une meilleure gestion du risque. Donc, il y aura Dominique là, comme ministre des Finances, qui connaît les douanes, et en plus, notre façon de gérer les douanes, qui, par la suite,
ça sera un dossier crucial, évidemment. Si vous voulez bien, M. Cochon, j'irai en terminant à Don Boudria. M. Boudria, le mot de la fin pour vous. Qu'est-ce qui va se passer à partir de maintenant, vous pensez?
Écoutez, premièrement, on a vu ce film-là dans le passé. Donc, oui, il y aura un lendemain. C'est sûr que les gens... Certains sont contents, d'autres le seront moins, mais il ne faut pas pour autant prétendre que c'est la fin du monde. Quand Paul Martin a quitté, le lendemain, Martin Cochon et moi, nous étions ministres et le gouvernement a continué. Quand John Turner a quitté sous Trudeau père, et lui aussi était ministre des Finances, Le gouvernement a continué le lendemain, etc. Donc, je pourrais vous citer l'exemple de Walter Gordon et d'autres de l'ancien temps, si vous voulez. Mais tout ça pour dire que c'est désagréable, une démission d'un ministre, surtout une démission d'un ministre des Finances. Mais pour autant, ce n'est pas la fin du gouvernement, encore moins la fin du monde.
Alors, on verra bien. Merci à vous trois. Merci, messieurs.
Merci, Mme Lassurance.
De retour à vous. Merci. De retour à vous, Michael.
Catherine, thank you for that. Well, let's bring in our political strategist into the discussion now. Danielle Medledge is a former Director of Communications to former Housing Minister Ahmed Hussein. She's now a Senior Consultant at Navigator. Cole Hogan, a Conservative Digital Strategist, Principal with GT. And George Sewell is a former NDP Director of Communications, now Principal at Syntax Strategics. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
You know, a lot to cover here because this has been such a day. But I have to begin with the very first question. Here you have the Prime Minister telling Chrystia Freeland on Friday, you're going to lose your job. However, we're going to ask you to read the speech on a budget you don't support. Are you surprised that the PMO and his closest advisors did not expect some type of blowback from Chrystia Freeland, Cole?
Yeah, what sort of political cachet did the PMO think that they had that they could ask Chrystia Freeland to bite a $62 billion bullet and then, you know, be replaced the next day or a couple of days after? So I'm kind of curious about what they thought that they had, or what sort of relationship they thought they had where they could ask for something so severe at such a cost and then expect there to be no political blowback or no consequences.
Yeah, what do you say to that, George?
Well, I mean, I agree, but beyond that, it's also, this has been a long time coming. I mean, we've seen all these leaks coming out of the PMO for weeks, and we've seen this play before, too. I mean, this is how they got rid of Bill Morneau. We've also seen the way this Prime Minister's office has dealt with other women in senior cabinet roles. So, you know, Chrystia Freeland's taken a lot of bullets for this Prime Minister, but I think sitting down on Friday and being told, hey, we're going to lose your job, you have a rough day on Monday, and on Tuesday, you'll get something else. You know, and maybe she, at that moment, decided, I'm really going to drop this bomb on Monday morning, or maybe she actually took the weekend to say, how loyal am I, and for how much more of my life do I want to be able to look myself in the mirror? And I think that at some point, she decided that her integrity was worth more than her relationship with the Prime Minister, and I think the Prime Minister should have seen that coming.
Yeah, her integrity, her reputation, because, you know, to your point, you're saying weeks, but actually it was over the summer that the first report came out about some type of potential rift between the PMO and the Finance Minister. Should the Prime Minister have expected this, Danielle?
I mean, you know what they say, Michael, the best laid plans, right? I mean, let's be honest here. I don't think any of this today was part of the plan. And I think that even if they did expect some type of blowback, it's safe to say they didn't expect any of this to happen. Nothing was ready to react to it. The first time we saw the Prime Minister make a physical appearance was about 10 to 11 hours after the Finance Minister announced she was resigning. It's one of these situations where nobody was ready. Everybody knew something could happen. Nobody knew how bad it would be. And we're seeing the consequences play out in real time.
Yeah, it also makes me wonder about loyalty within the cabinet, though, because to your point, George, here you have a very loyal soldier. No one has taken, to use your words, taken as many bullets as Chrystia Freeland. And yet, for all the loyalty, she is going to be passed over for another candidate, presumably for Mark Carney for the finance portfolio. What does that do to cabinet and caucus unity? If the Prime Minister does not show loyalty to one who's shown such great loyalty to him, what signal does that send to others within the Liberal caucus and the cabinet?
Let alone, the easiest way I could put it is not a good one, right? I mean, at this point, it's been made pretty clear the caucus is not united. The party is not united. Whether the Prime Minister wants to step out like he did last time and say the Liberal Party is united and happy, I don't think is an option anymore on the table. And I think that's something that he fully recognizes. He's going to take the time that he seems to need to get to a point where he thinks he can bring back the party. Whether or not that's doable, I think that ship has sailed, unfortunately.
Okay, and you know, I'll get you to answer that, Cole, but I think we should say out of the caucus meeting this late afternoon into the early evening, it seems to be the word is that the Prime Minister, and this could change because things keep changing in this story, like left and right, but it seems that the Prime Minister is going to take the Christmas break to consider the future. But we'll get there in a moment, Cole, but what do you say about loyalty within the Liberal Party if the Prime Minister has done this to a woman who's shown him such great loyalty?
Yeah, and it's not the first time, right? So if we see this repeating trend of those who are loyal to the Prime Minister and those, you know, who lay out his fiscal plans and carry them forward in terms of, you know, each ministry, and they get left by the wayside, you know, those who are aspiring to get into cabinet may hesitate and think twice to be like, well, is this something that I actually want, if they're just going to, you know, bring in someone from the outside or have an unelected person like Mark Carney take the position instead of someone who's paid their dues, been re-elected, and has carried so much water for Justin Trudeau.
George?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to the most recent kind of caucus revolt or whatever that we thought was going to be a big deal, where, you know, as I've been saying, that a bunch of MPs signed their names in invisible ink onto a petition to get the Prime Minister to leave, but nobody would come out, no, almost nobody would come out and speak about it because you feel like you're alone and the Prime Minister's got all this power. But when you have somebody like Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, someone who's been with the Prime Minister basically since he started as leader, and it's kind of been like his big star candidate as he built up towards the 2015 election. When something like that comes out, then everybody else who's been sitting quietly now has some cover, and they can see there's a reason for someone inspiring to actually follow. So I think it completely blows up this idea of solidarity with the Prime Minister, because now people have someone else to line up behind, and somebody like Chrystia Freeland is someone that I think is worthy of following.
Yeah, there's also a pure policy question here, because and I think it's worthwhile for us to bring up the deficit board. And this was the fall economic statement, which was supposed to be the major story of today. But take a look at where the deficit currently sits, about $21 billion over what we said, we're told rather, that 23-24 would come at. $61.9 billion is the updated figure. How does the government move ahead with any economic plans, given the pointed criticisms that Chrystia Freeland had with what the Prime Minister was trying to sell Canadians?
Absolutely, and I think that's really the major crux of what today should have been about. We never actually got to that point because the government never actually made a speech to defend what this ballooned number actually signifies, right? Is it one-time costs that are only being taken on today, and so we're going to see a trajectory on the downward moving forward? Is this something that we're going to see more of a trend of? Is this to pay off debts because of a COVID residue type of increase? We don't know. The government did not step ahead and really put their best foot forward and say, let me break it down for you in a way that is not, you know, doomsday. But unfortunately, the only people who came out and talked about it are the people who are painting it as the doomsday, because that's the only narrative we're hearing right now. We're not hearing anything from new Finance Minister LeBlanc on the situation because he didn't get briefed until 7 minutes before it was tabled, right? So it's one of these things where, again, there's just too much going on. There is a finance minister who could have spoken to these numbers, who's no longer a part of the cabinet. She's still on the team, but people are not seeing the team as one united front anymore.
Yeah, how does the government move forward with something like this goal?
I don't know if they can. You know, if you look at Bill Morneau and you look at the situation with Chrystia Freeland here is two instances where a finance minister advised fiscal caution of some sort, then, you know, was either shown the door or quit on their own accord. And things were so bad that each finance minister had looked at their interaction with this PMO and said, okay, well, they don't want an independent thinking finance minister. They want someone who will rubber stamp their plans, because they're taking into consideration their political maneuvering more than they are any sort of fiscal caution or prudence.
Okay. I'm going to switch topics, George. I'm sorry, because we're running out of time, but I need to focus on what's going to happen. And let's bring up for people at home the cabinet ministers who have already signaled either they're gone or they're not going to be running again. Chrystia Freeland at the top of the list. You see there 9 ministers already that have left or are not going to be running again. You know, what options are left for the Prime Minister? And George, I'll get you to start off here. Like, I mean, is it prorogation? Is it a resignation? What options are left for the Prime Minister when even senior members who were his closest are deciding, I don't want to run again?
Well, I don't know how many more roles Dominic LeBlanc can take on, so he might have reached his cap. I think what's coming next, I don't see, and I try to not be partisan about this, though I am, but I don't see a way for the Prime Minister to get out of this. I mean, I was saying today that I think the best that I think the Prime Minister could have hoped for out of this caucus meeting was to say, look, I have a plan, sort of like Jean Chrétien did. I have a plan. I hear you. I'm going to get out. Now, hopefully, he doesn't take 18 months. I don't think he has 18 months. I'm not sure he has 18 days, like Jean Chrétien did. But, you know, give me the dignity of leaving. Now, if he doesn't do that, I don't know what the options are. He's going to try to hide until, you know, the House comes back at the end of January. But then, in that intervening time, there's going to be a new president elected. We're supposed to be negotiating tariffs that are a threat to our economy. Never mind border security, the Arctic, two major conflicts, wars around the world. Without clear leadership in this country, Canada's going to lose more and more legitimacy on the world stage. So I honestly think the only option is for him to leave and then figure out some kind of quick way to replace the leadership in the Liberal Party and then probably move to an election from there.
Okay, quickly for the two of you, where do you see this going?
Well, I think number one, the issue with doing something like telling your caucus, okay, give me a few days and I'll figure out my way. I mean, that's the first thing that's going to be frontline news is people leaking that and saying, well, here we go, guys. He's not going to be able to do it on his own accord, right? It's going to be
Which is like the caucus revolt, where he said
exactly.
he'd listen seriously and then by the next day moved on.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this one, who knows how that one's going to end up. I feel like this is a completely different situation. You have a very visible, high-profile woman in his cabinet, the highest-profile woman that a third of Canadians can at least name as coming out against him in a very strong way. I would say at this point, there's a lot of backing. The numbers are increasing. The pressure is increasing. But in terms of what comes next, I think, like you said, it's going to be one of these things where he's trying to take control of the way he does it. Whether or not his group of MPs who still believe in him will give him that opportunity is yet to be seen. But I do think that it's not looking like it's going to be a decision anytime soon.
Cool.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more cabinet ministers dropping. There's people that aren't running again. The government can't function, and it hasn't, since September or before that. It looks, and there's massive negotiations in terms of the tariffs, the 25% tariffs that are coming in the door. There needs to be an election so we can have someone with a clear mandate to deal with all these issues, because it's clear that Justin Trudeau's government can't function.
Okay, I've got less than 2 minutes, so I really need a quick answer. We're talking about everything within the Liberal parties, right? But what about the opposition? Can they bring about change? Can they bring down the government? We know the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives say that they want to. Can they actually do it, Cole?
I think, this is the perfect time, I think, if I was to give advice to the NDP, which I'm not in the habit of doing often, but...
You're coming up next, George.
This is the perfect time for Jagmeet Singh to get up and say, all right, actually, I mean it this time. Enough is enough. Like, it's time to hold these people to account. And you have the perfect opportunity here. Your opponent has lit themselves on fire. So it's time to take advantage of that and take some bold political action, and hopefully you can benefit from it and end up with more seats in the Liberal Party after the next election.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to that, George?
Well, today Jagmeet Singh came out and said it's time for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to resign. So he said that, and in the absence of that, I think whenever a vote does come to the House, he will vote. I imagine would vote non-confidence. But the way our system works is, to be honest, it's in the hands of the government. It's in the hands of the Liberals until a confidence motion comes, which again will be probably February at the earliest. There's nothing that any of the opposition parties can do other than stand up and lay out a clear path forward. And frankly, to Cole's point, I think what the NDP has to do is show themselves to be the clear alternative to Pierre Poilievre, and that's what they need to focus on until they have an opportunity to take down the government.
Okay, last 30 seconds to you.
Absolutely. Well, I'll challenge that a little bit, because this is the first time I hear someone say that Jagmeet would vote this way, because he didn't say that himself, that he would vote non-confidence. At the end of the day, that is something the opposition can do, is state their opinion, give their position, and speak on behalf of their constituents. We didn't see that happen. The government is a minority. If the opposition party banded together, a lot could have been done at a lot of different confidence motions that have taken place. So at this point, it's more about actions than words, and we haven't seen any of those.
Okay, well, we're out of time. I'm really glad that the three of you were so patient, hanging around, waiting to figure out where this was going to turn. So to Danielle, Cole, and George, thank you very much for this evening.
Thanks so much.
And I'm Michael Serapio. You've been watching special coverage here on CPAC on what has been an incredibly busy, if not roller coaster day, beginning with the resignation of Chrystia Freeland from her role as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and all that caused for the Prime Minister and his Liberal team. Of course, we'll continue to follow the story for you right here on CPAC. For everyone here, thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time.